Good morning. I'd like to open this public hearing of the United States Election Assistance Commission. First, I've been reminded, everyone please silence your cell phones so that we can proceed uninterrupted. This hearing will start with the Pledge of Allegiance, so if we could stand and pledge allegiance.
Which way?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you and good morning. We're going to start with just a couple short notes, and we're going to be conscious of time this morning as well. There's a hard stop at noon for a variety of reasons, so we'll proceed relatively quickly. I want to start first by recognizing and sending, I think, the Commission's thoughts and prayers to Secretary of State Kim Wyman, who was recently diagnosed with cancer. I know the entire election community supports you and knows that you are going to fight and battle back cancer, and so we're with you on that. Next, I want to take just a moment of, chairman's privilege. This is my first meeting as chairman. I became chair in February, succeeding vice chairman now, Commissioner Thomas Hicks. And so I wanted to thank you for your year as chairman, for your leadership. Needless to say, it was a pretty eventful year for you. It was a pretty big presidential election year. And so we wanted to present to you a gavel in salute of your time as chairman, and thank you for your leadership from all of us here at the commission.
Thank you. Thank you. I really do appreciate that. What I always say is that this is not a commission of chair, vice chair, or just commissioners. I think all of us function really well together, and I want to thank you both for your leadership, and we could not have done this without all three of us here. So thank you again.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Next, we'll do a roll call. Thank you. First one, can you tell? So I'll call roll to make sure we have a quorum present. Vice Chairman Thomas Hicks.
Here.
Commissioner Christy McCormick.
Here.
And Chairman Matt Masterson is here. I would take motions to adopt the agenda for today.
I move to adopt the agenda for this hearing.
I second it.
Those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Okay, we'll move forward. In lieu of giving opening remarks by the three commissioners, we've agreed to submit our opening remarks for the record so that we can move forward with the panelists. So I'll start with a couple introductory comments, and then start with you, Secretary Merrill, introduce you, allow you to give your opening comments, and work my way down the line if that's okay. Today we examine the Department of Homeland Security's decision to designate U.S. election systems as part of the nation's critical infrastructure and its possible impact on those, who administer elections. We'll hear stakeholder concerns and responses to the designation, questions from the election officials who are still trying to figure out how it will impact the way elections work, and feedback from those who will be most affected by this step. We will also have the opportunity to hear directly from the Department of Homeland Security, and we thank you all for being here to testify today. As you will surely hear throughout today's testimony, the critical infrastructure designation has left many election officials and stakeholders, including those of you at the table, with an overabundance of questions. It has drawn fair skepticism and even outright opposition from election leaders, including a resolution passed by the National Association of Secretaries of State, who will provide testimony during this first panel. The purpose of today's hearing is to provide a forum for those most impacted by this designation to offer their candid thoughts and ask their remaining questions. It's also a time for us to engage directly with the Department of Homeland Security in a discussion that addresses those questions and examines the next steps in this process. We gather here today at an important moment in time. Just this month, the U.S. House and Senate Intelligence Committees held hearings on potential election interference from foreign government. During those hearings, we heard members of the intelligence community reiterate that no voting machines or votes were manipulated during the election. Put simply, the election was not hacked. They also indicated that cyber threats remain real and persistent. We know that voters continue to have questions and concerns regarding the security of the elections process. We know that election officials are working hard to maintain aging election systems and incorporate new technologies in order to keep elections accessible, accurate, and secure. Against this backdrop, dedicated and hardworking election officials from more than 8,000 voting jurisdictions across the United States are preparing for their next election. In fact, there are elections today across the United States. They are working every day to secure a diverse and interdependent set of election systems against threats by those seeking to carry out cyber attacks. They are operating on election standard time, which means they can't hit pause until all of their questions are answered. Their deadline, the next election day, in their jurisdiction is not flexible and does not move. So acknowledging that we have no time to waste in figuring out how this designation will impact them, let's kick off this meeting and this hearing with our first speaker. Secretary of State Denise Merrill is the 73rd Secretary of State of the state of Connecticut. Since taking office, she has supported and expanded democratic participation, ensuring that every citizen's rights and privileges are protected and that every vote is counted accurately. She was also elected recently the president of the National Association of Secretaries of State for the term of 2016-2017. Secretary Merrill, thank you for being here, and we'd welcome your opening comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Push this?
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm sorry.
And good morning.
Good morning.
So thank you for the opportunity to be here today on behalf of the National Association of Secretaries of State. And didn't I pick an interesting year to be president? We represent 40 chief state election officials who oversee the conduct of elections according to the law. And as Connecticut's Secretary of the State, it is my job to ensure the integrity of the voting process, which includes cyber preparedness and contingency planning of all different kinds. My colleagues and I also provide administrative and technical support for their local election officials. I've been asked to discuss thoughts on moving forward under the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's designation of elections as critical infrastructure, which took place on January 6, 2017. Secretaries of States strongly opposed this move, adopting a bipartisan resolution against the designation in February. We are coming to the table reluctantly, because the bureaucratic wheels are clearly in motion, and Secretary Kelly has indicated he will keep the designation in place. And I apologize in advance for the length of my testimony, but I think it's very important that this be entered in the record. What does this mean for election officials? Well, for starters, it means grappling with how this executive order will actually work. DHS says it provides a more institutionalized foundation for protecting our voting process from independent and state-sponsored attacks, particularly cyber attacks. Yet it comes with no added technical support beyond what was already offered without the designation, no funding to help upgrade systems, and no additional help for states that do not wish to bring the federal government into their security process. While threats clearly exist, the more immediate challenge for secretaries of state is making sure that a hastily formed subsector of critical infrastructure doesn't create more problems than it actually solves. So I'm going to share some key facts and findings from the 2016 presidential election that we put forward in a briefing paper in March, and then talk about the role of the states in this new normal of critical infrastructure. So first, the point I'd like to make echoes what Mr. Masterson said. The 2016 presidential election was not hacked. It's extremely important to separate fact from fiction around this election cycle. In order to set the record straight on what did and did not happen regarding our voting process, we released a briefing, and here are the several key points. No major cybersecurity issues were reported on November 8th. While our political institutions were clearly targeted by cyber attacks by Russia, a fact has been well documented, that has been well documented by our national intelligence agencies. The voting process itself was not hacked, manipulated, or rigged in any way. In fact, the accuracy of the results were reinforced by several presidential-focused recount attempts to verify vote totals. Second, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security confirmed to NAS that 33 states and 36 county jurisdictions had taken advantage of the agency's voluntary assistance by Election Day. NAS and DHS also achieved a joint goal of ensuring that all 50 states were notified of the federal government resources that were available to them upon request. including cyber hygiene scans on internet-facing systems and risk and vulnerability assessments. Those states that didn't utilize DHS assistance received similar support from their own state. Third, foreign intrusions into state and local election boards were limited to 2 incidents that did not involve systems using vote tallying. State voter registration systems were targeted by cyber hackers, but no additional systems were accessed and breached. And as many of you know, and we know, that's because most of them are not cyber. Frankly, voting via internet-based systems is not a reality in the United States. The 2016 cycle demonstrated we're not really cyber at all, except for our voter registration databases, which has nothing to do with the actual tallying of votes. It would make it very inherently difficult, if not impossible, to carry out large-scale cyber attacks. So what does this mean for securing future elections? This brings me to my second point. Elections are fundamentally different from any other sector or subsector of critical infrastructure. There's no question that expanded information sharing between all levels of government will be helpful for increasing the resiliency of our electoral system. However, there's also strong sentiment that funding and resources would be better focused on updating outdated voting technologies and supporting states in protecting their own systems. With little information released by either the Obama or the Trump administration, NAS has created an election cybersecurity task force to study issues related to the designation and to more broadly foster cooperation and diversity on cybersecurity issues that are very unique to the election process. To date, the concerns of state officials have not been sufficiently addressed, despite our questions over and over again. As I've mentioned, NAS members adopted a resolution opposing the critical infrastructure designation on February 18th, 2017. Secretaries of State have asked President Trump to rescind the decision. We will continue to articulate opposition to the designation and point out that this is not an issue defined by political party. Our bipartisan position is bolstered by a September 2016 letter in which both House and Senate congressional leaders stated, quote, "We would oppose efforts by the federal government to exercise any degree of control over the state's administration of elections by designating the systems as critical infrastructure." The letter was signed by House Speaker Ryan, Minority Leader Pelosi, Senate Majority Leader McConnell, and former Minority Leader Harry Reid. The current top-down process of establishing and implementing the critical infrastructure designation for elections creates a number of issues when applied to our bottom-up voting process. For starters, there is no centralized uniform election system in the U.S. Elections are administered on a state and local basis. As we have repeatedly emphasized during the November 2016 presidential election, this autonomy produces a level of 50-state diversity that is our greatest asset against malicious attacks. Because our system is highly decentralized, there's no way to disrupt the voting process in any large-scale, meaningful way through cyber attacks because there's no national system to attack. Yet pursuant to PPD 21, DHS, not the state, becomes the center of work to protect the subsector. The federals must oversee a process of formulating a subsector risk profile with corresponding preparedness standards. There are myriad questions about whether this leads to additional oversight and regulation, possibly raising constitutional questions. We've heard the DHS talking point that all assistance is voluntary over and over again. Yet there's nothing in law that defines any parameters on the designation. What resources and information will be withheld from states that do not want DHS help? Will voluntary guidelines become the basis for litigation in states where they're not being used? Adoption of the NIST cybersecurity framework has already become a point of litigation in other sectors of critical infrastructure. We also don't have a clear understanding of how all of the federal agencies will be working together to serve states under the designation. For example, we've already seen federal proposals to mandate the use of voter-verified paper trails, yet only 5 states still utilize electronic voting machines without those paper trails. Furthermore, the AC's voluntary voting system guidelines are currently being updated to reflect what is already a de facto standard across states, possibly creating redundancies in federal processes. And finally, and very importantly, there are concerns about public trust in elections. U.S. government military and intelligence agencies can classify their work to shield it from public scrutiny. How will the broad exemptions from public records and sunshine laws that are afforded to critical infrastructure affect trust and transparency in our electoral process? Right now, our system is designed to foster transparency and participation from end to end, from public testing of voting equipment to poll watchers to public counting of the ballots to post-election audits. If the critical infrastructure designation reduces diversity, autonomy, and transparency in state and local election systems, the potential for adverse effects from perceived or real cyber attacks will likely be much greater and not the other way around. So finally, I'll lay out a few goals that the Secretaries of State have moving forward. We have established, as I said, the NAS Election Cybersecurity Task Force, which currently has members from 27 states, wants to ensure that state election officials are working together to combat threats and foster effective partnerships with the federal government and other public-private stakeholders. Specifically, the deliverables for the task force we have laid out include, first, developing possible NAS policies or resolutions on election cybersecurity. Second, assisting NAS with guidance on federal government outreach and information sharing related to cybersecurity, including the DHS critical infrastructure designation, assuming it will be retained. Third, developing and convening a NAS election cybersecurity forum this July as part of our summer conference, which is already in the works. And fourth, providing input and feedback on NAS stakeholder outreach and communications. We're beginning with data collection to inform the work of the task force. We've also begun outreach to DHS to continue to try to understand exactly what has been asked of states under this designation. While we remain opposed to the executive order, it is our current reality, and it is important for us to have a seat at the table. We also need to develop a better system of communication and trust with DHS. We're working to help the appropriate officials apply for classified status, which apparently we need to have in order to be part of these communication systems, and advocating for greater state involvement in decision making. As we speak, the DHS Inspector General is conducting an independent investigation into evidence of unauthorized scans that were performed from a DHS IP address against the Georgia Secretary of State's computer network. The Indiana Secretary of State's office has also submitted results of a state investigation that concluded with a high degree of certainty, that's a quote, that similar unauthorized activity was detected against their computer network from the same IP address. You can see this creates concern in the states, and other states have reflected similar concerns. We need a forthright accounting from the Inspector General's office as soon as possible, and hope to hear more on the status of this investigation. In conclusion, there's no doubt that more can and will be done to bolster resources, security protocols, technical support for state and local officials heading into future elections. The lesson from 2016 is that we are the front line in securing election systems from very real threats that exist in the digital age. As we continue to find our way under this new normal, let's not forget the true cyber capability of our elections rests in our hands. As Connecticut Secretary of State, I continue to oversee the administration of our elections process in a nonpartisan, transparent, and fair manner. I'm proud of the dedication and integrity of my local and state-level election team, and I remain supportive of efforts to collaborate on securing and enhancing our elections. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Merrill. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Next, we'll move to Chris Chambliss. Mr. Chambliss is the 39-year Clay County resident, 18-year employee of the Clay Supervisor of Elections Office, and the supervisor since 2008. He's also a United States Air Force veteran. Thank you for your service. And the president of the Florida Association of Supervisors of Election, and also a member of the Election Center Cyber Task Force. Perhaps most importantly, he's also a deacon, and we could all use your thoughts and prayers in this industry. So, Mr. Chambliss, with that, you have, I'm going to flip the timer. If you go a little bit over, that's okay, but it's just a guide, and the floor is yours.
Good morning. My name is Chris Chambliss, and I represent Clay County, Florida, a mid-sized community of nearly 150,000 registered voters, and currently serve as the president of the Florida State Association of Supervisors of Elections, home to just under 13 million voters. The only constant in elections is change. When I began my service nearly 20 years ago, I came to the Clay County Elections Office as a contractor hired to migrate from punch cards to optical scan, as well as install the first computer in the elections office, and a migration from an AS400 mainframe to a true client server based network. Gone were the days of waiting until the wee hours of the morning on the day after the election for a glimpse of the winners or losers in a hotly contested contest. With tabulators equipped with modems and central count facilities, results were now learned in hours, if not minutes, of the polls closing. Post-2000, many jurisdictions in Florida made the migration from punch cards to DRE touchscreens, bypassing optical scan. In fact, many Florida voters cast their first votes on different voting systems for each of the next 3 presidential election seasons, migrating from punch cards to DREs to optical scan. It's important to take into account the changes of vote methods during these transformative years, going from election day voting to absentee for voters who demonstrated their absence from their local jurisdiction, to models that offer no excuse vote by mail, early voting, all mail ballot elections, provisionals, FWABs, faxed ballots, and in some cases vote centers. It's easy to see that elections environment has become much more robust and technical, and as elections administrators, we would be well served to increase our IT knowledge base. It's that point that I want to make, that elections officials and administrators have become IT professionals. As a matter of fact, the EAC has created a new program that brings IT training to elections administrators, highlighting the point to become aware of technology. With many jurisdictions depending more and more on connected various information systems, offering real-time access to voter registration, as well as election night reporting, I see the requirement of various systems only grows to as many look to OVR, ERIC, vote centers, and who knows what's come down the next pike. The honest answer is that instead of looking outside the elections community to the Department of Homeland Security, election professionals for years and years have looked inwardly as we control the IT infrastructure that we use. It is my recommendation that we continue to take advantage of not only the EAC programs, but ones that are offered by NAS and the Elections Center as we grow our own administration, instead of looking to Department of Homeland Security. It has been said that with the Department of Homeland Security transition that many resources will come. But I ask you, what more resources will come that aren't available today? Currently, right now, we have the cyber hygiene and the PINS testing, as well as other services that Department of Homeland Security offers. Is there going to be funding that's made available to physical security enhancements? Those are questions that are left to be answered. So it is my recommendation that we continue, as we have in the past, to use elections administrators to handle the IT infrastructure today and tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chambliss. I appreciate it. And I hope to get to some of your questions with the next panel as well. So thank you. Next is Mr. Ricky Hatch. Mr. Hatch is the Weber County Clerk and Auditor in Weber County, Utah. He currently serves as the Election Officials Division Director for the International Association of Government Officials. I got it right? The new name, IGO. He's been the 2015 Utah Clerk of the Year and is the chairman of the Utah Clerk and Auditors Association. Mr. Hatch, thank you for being with us here today, and we look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting us to come discuss this important topic. I really appreciate the efforts of the EAC. Let's face it, we as Americans are a skeptical lot, especially when there's a strong central government involved. It's been that way for a couple hundred years, and it will probably continue, and that's part of the beauty of this country. As election officials, we're even more skeptical. I think mostly because so often people who aren't involved in the nuts and bolts of election administration feel that they can come in and fix it without understanding the processes. I think it's understandable as election officials, those who live and breathe elections, concepts, and administration, that we're doubtful and hesitant and concerned when so-called outsiders come in and offer assistance or offer aid. When I first heard about the designation back in January, I was very concerned. In fact, I immediately put a summary together and emailed it off to about 600 election officials throughout the country, sharing that information through the IGO organization. However, as I've read the statement and the designation a little more closely, my concern is a little bit lessened. I particularly liked how it was written. I liked that it said that this is not a federal takeover of local and state jurisdictions, election jurisdictions, and I appreciated that. It helped me feel a little bit better. It seemed like it's a voluntary offering of resources for states and counties and election jurisdictions that don't have the resources or perhaps the bandwidth to address these types of issues. So that's helpful. However, is this the proverbial camel's nose in the tent? And I think it's very valid for NAS to come forward and present their concerns, and I think we should all view this with an eye of skepticism until we understand the nuts and bolts, until we understand the details of how this designation will impact us. And so I have several questions as well, as far as how do you accept the designation, at what levels are those accepted, and once you accept, is there a way to rescind that later if you feel that it's been accomplished or you no longer want to participate? On the election side, I am confident that the election systems in the United States are in good hands. Election officials were control freaks. We know that, and it's a good thing. It's how it should be. We are meticulous logistical planners who never stop planning for the next election. We are constantly focused on what we can do better. Before I took office, I worked for 7 years as a certified information systems auditor with PricewaterhouseCoopers in Los Angeles and overseas. And when I took office back in 2011, I looked at our local elections infrastructure with a very critical eye, with the eye of an auditor. And frankly, I liked what I saw. I was impressed with the levels of security, the physical security, the logical security, and the human-based security that really provided strong controls over the process. I had no idea that the controls and the security were so detailed and so robust. And when we take tours, candidates or citizens or others who want to come see our elections process, and we bring them on tours through our facilities, I get the same response. They are impressed, and they're actually comforted when they see the level of controls that election officials put into securing the elections process. However, we can always improve. And if this critical infrastructure designation, it provides additional resources for us to be able to improve our security without losing our jurisdiction or without having some superimposed power or concern from a federal level on this, then to me it's another arrow in the quiver that election officials have to make our elections better and smoother and more secure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hatch. Appreciate it. Next is Mr. Lance Goff, who needs no introduction, the longtime executive director of the Chicago Board of Election Commissioners. Mr. Goff manages the day-to-day operations of one of the largest election authorities in the United States, with approximately 1.4 million, I bet it's a little bit bigger than that at this point, registered voters. And this year marks his 26th year, is that correct?
It's 27.
27th year.
My person that wrote it doesn't count well.
As the executive of the agency. Mr. Goff, we look forward to your testimony, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to the commission for inviting me. Chairman, you and I have talked many times, and I just wanted to thank the EAC. When this last election, 2016, we had an issue with the Postmaster General, and you and I got on the phone and called, and for the first 2 weeks, that's all he did was talk to the Postmaster General. So I appreciate all your help that the EAC and you did. I have been the executive director for several years at the Chicago Board of Election, and I've been in the election business for over 30 years. I've held almost every major organization post. I was president of IACRIAT with the Election Center, so I've been around for a long time. And just to let you know, the only constant in elections is change. And every time we have change in elections, they get more and more complicated. When I first started, almost 30 years ago, the only thing that we had to worry about is making sure we had polling places, that we had our poll workers trained, and that we had the equipment delivered, and it was all working. Now, with new infrastructures of early voting, vote by mail, election day registration, electronic poll books, has made our job more and more difficult. Internet, most recently, the reason why we're here today and what we encountered in these events is internet hacks and attacks on voter registration database. Growing concern by the voting public and the mass media that the balloting system could be hacked. These concerns were also amplified in statements by high-profile campaign surrogates and also candidates themselves before and after the election. I just would like the commission know that our vote counting system was not hacked. There was issues with some databases, like Illinois' a statewide database for voter registration, and also in Arizona. These were attacked, but they were not altered, and nothing was changed. Both jurisdictions had backups, were able to find out what was wrong, and they cured it right away. But because of this, we were called in. We had a meeting in Illinois with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, the U.S. Department of Justice, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation to talk about the infrastructure of our voting system. After meeting with these different groups, they and we came to the conclusion that we've been the watchdogs of our vote counting system, and our vote counting system has not been hacked. We also welcome any advice on any type of protocols, safeguards. But we were offered, and the Homeland Security offered different softwares to go in and screen clean our systems. You have to understand, we did not take advantage of it, because once we did mention that, we were reported by people on the Republican Party saying that Democrats are trying to take over the election mechanism, and then vice versa, the Democrats said that the Republicans were trying to take over. We're right here to say, hands off. There has to be a line in the sand drawn between information and actual tampering with our systems. We know what we're doing. We've been doing this long enough. The Secretary, Madam Secretary, also at the National Association of Secretaries of States, brought that out also in their statement. Critical infrastructures. The Chicago Board, for over 30 years, I've been fighting this. I've been fighting the claims that in Chicago, elections are full with vote fraud and hacked. We've had the FBI, we've had other governmental agencies come in and review and audit our systems, and found out none of this was true. And, you know, I met with Ron Rivest of MIT, and I asked him certain questions about, you know, voting equipment, voting systems, and he said, Lance, we know that your vote systems has not been hacked. We know that. And I said, well, let's talk. What about internet voting? And he says, and his comment was, well, we can send a man to the moon. But with internet voting, you'll have people that want to try to shoot it down and also try to get into it. So he said, in the near future, you and I will both be retired by the time we have internet voting. So just to hurry up and wrap up, because I know we're short on time, just to let you know, our systems can and do come under attack. We welcome and value the input and added awareness that comes with the critical infrastructure designation. Yes, online voter registrations can and should be scanned and swept with cyber hygiene programs as one of the safeguards. However, when it comes to our local balloting and vote tabulation systems, we must tread carefully, and we must not cross that line between advice and access. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goff. I appreciate it. Finally is Mr. Trevor Timmons, who's the Chief Information Officer for the Colorado Secretary of State's office. Trevor served as the CIO for the Colorado Secretary of State since 2007. Mr. Timmons has supported election systems in Colorado through a variety of changes, I'd say, in the last decade. That's a theme here with this panel. And has also served as a member of the Colorado Information Security Advisory Board since its founding in 2012. And I want to thank you for being here. So often we leave out the technical experts like yourselves in these discussions, and so I appreciate you being here, sharing your expertise, and as a former state CIO in a secretary's office, I think your perspective is incredibly valuable. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman Masterson. And on behalf of the Colorado Secretary of State, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to participate in this discussion. Honestly, we view this designation by DHS as a recognition of the wide variety of threats that face computer systems and some uncertainty as to the risk profiles of the various entities and systems that are involved in the conduct of elections. We welcome a productive dialogue between election officials and DHS, which started last August with the initial outreach on behalf of DHS based on concerns about the security of the election system. We do believe that DHS needs input and feedback from elections officials to understand the domain. Elections officials would benefit from knowing that current body of knowledge that has been assembled by DHS that is influencing the work that they're contemplating moving forward with. I understand that Mr. Jenkins was quoted last week as saying that DHS is anticipating meeting within the next couple of weeks or months on how to establish that coordinating council for the subsector, and we are eager to engage, and we hope to develop a roadmap for future work to dispel doubts about the scope, extent, and impact of that designation on state and local election officials. We look forward to better understanding the expected timelines and the calls for action and information sharing as that coordinating council is formed and commences its work. Election officials are laboring from a lack of knowledge of other work areas under DHS that might explain the many signals of access to state systems that's been reported by some states, such as Georgia and Indiana. We look forward to a frank discussion of DHS's assessment of that activity that was sourced from DHS computers that has been documented by those states. We want to work together as DHS, both at the federal and the state level, have already demonstrated a willingness to do, and ensure that joint resources are directed towards those areas of most prominent and likely risk and the highest probability of effective action. Average citizens and voters will benefit from public statements by elections officials and by the Department of Homeland Security, affirming confidence in the elections process where that is appropriate, and also urging attention paid to risks facing the system. It is difficult for citizens to separate statements around activities that may affect the confidence of folks in elections and the elections systems themselves. While Colorado initially opposed the designation, we're eager to participate and look forward to working together to prioritize areas for assessment and for action. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you to all. Before I open it up to questions for for my fellow commissioners, I'd like to ask, without objection, to enter into the record the NAS resolution on critical infrastructure, so we have it for a complete record.
I move that we enter.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So moved. So we'll enter that into the record to make sure that that's part of the record. With that, I'll turn it over first to Vice Chairman Hicks for questions for the panelists.
First, I want to thank you all for being here. It's very important to hear from each and every one of you about your thoughts on these issues. I don't want to ask too many questions, but I do have a few. I also want to echo the chairman's wishes for Secretary Wyman to make a full and quick recovery. Our thoughts and prayers definitely go out to her. Basically, one of the things that I don't want to ever look back onto my chairmanship of last year again, but I wanted to always look forward. So my thoughts are, and questions before that is, was 2016 basically the first instance of this being an issue? And I ask that because I know that election officials pay a lot of attention to not only cyber attacks but also physical attacks. So so this was nothing new to you. So I wanted to find out what were the things that you did differently in 2016 that you hadn't done in 2014 or 2012, because we still had the same sort of infrastructure with voting equipment and election night reporting and voter registration lists. So I'm basically trying to figure out in terms of, I'm sure that there are bad actors that always happen these things and do these things. And so that's my first question, if anyone wants to take that.
Thank you. Again, Trevor Timmons from Colorado. Many of the steps that states have taken to secure election system have remained constant in terms of vigilance, in terms of testing, in terms of logic and accuracy testing of voting systems. But honestly, the extent of the involvement of computers around the elections process has changed significantly in the last decade. In Colorado, we have become an all-mail ballot state. We still allow voters to come in person and vote in person. And I think the growth in online voter registration systems and the growth in the use of electronic poll books during early voting and on election day, I think it's changed the landscape in terms of the risks that election officials must prepare for. In our state, as in many states, we've done vulnerability scanning, such as offered by DHS. We are one of the states that took them up on that offer of cyber hygiene scanning. We viewed that as an additional layer of protection, an additional layer of knowledge in our state, even though we'd done that already. We've done penetration tests of those network-facing systems that are involved in the conduct of elections. In my opinion, I think the attack profile will continue to change as online voter registration, as automatic voter registration, and as the use of electronic poll books continues to grow within the country.
Anyone else?
Yes, thank you, Lance Goff. Just to let the commission know that ever since we got the first computer in our office, we started worried about somebody hacking in. A 14-year-old with a laptop who's a genius in his home basement trying to attack into our system. We have monitors on our equipment, and I can show you that we have somebody trying to get into our system constantly. It's something 24 hours a day. So we take this very seriously, but we've been prepared for this. We've screened off anything that could do anything with identity theft. That's my biggest concern. If somebody got a list of voters, but if you have no phone numbers, you have no Social Security, you have just the last date of birth, it's a lot harder to get that information out. So it's something that I've been concerned for the last 30 years.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I think basically all of us and all the states became more aware of it, and we started looking into what our states were already doing, and I think there was a big differential, but in general, the states were all doing these things already. You have to remember that many states do not have their own IT departments, most in the elections office. Many of them operate through the state's IT department, which is responsible for security and those sorts of protocols. And I think all of us were called upon to find out about that and inform the public. I think it's also time to remind people that in most states, the voter registration list is a public document. The names on the list, and it has become a big political issue in many states, including my own, when people became aware that their name on that voter list is public information, and now, because it's automated, can now be, by law, must be given to anyone who pays whatever amount the state is charging to get that list. So it's another thing to remember when we're thinking about how important this all is, in the sense that what we all found out when we looked into this when it first came up publicly is that there are multiple, I guess you'd call them redundancies in our system. All of us have backup lists, paper lists. And this is true throughout the election systems, which I think it became important to let the public know exactly how many security systems are in place. Many of them, ironically, paper. And so, when you start thinking about what is the importance of all this, of course we should all be doing those cyber scans and, the various protocols that most states, I believe, do have in place, either through their main IT department or through their own IT department. But you have to remember again, back to this issue that elections are public. They're transparent. We must inform the public about who are legitimate voters in their district. We must inform them about, the vote tallies, and all those are public processes very carefully put in place. So I think that, frankly, is the greatest protection we have.
A point that I want to reiterate that was mentioned before was that election officials are control freaks. And so we do have a lot of backups to backups. Absent of the large removal of IP addresses that were given to us by the FBI and other agencies based upon phishing reports, we have always had a great deal of physical security to our infrastructure. In the state of Florida, whenever we have ballot definitions out in our machines or ballots out, it's always two-person control throughout the process for that. And so it was business as usual with regards to physical security, with regards to cybersecurity. I think that what highlighted was third-party entities that were giving us resources with blocks of IP addresses that were pinging our systems that we blocked. And so other than that, it was just a normal election.
In the interest of time, I think I'll ask that I be able to just submit questions for the witnesses for the record later on. But I did wanted to thank Mr. Hatch again for serving with PricewaterhouseCoopers, because I think that they had a small fiasco with their election of the Oscars this past February. But we wish you were there. So with that, I yield back my time.
Thank you. And yeah, we will keep the record open for a period of 7 days for the commissioners to submit statements, as well as any interested election officials, advocates, or whatnot to submit questions. If you go to eac.gov, you can view the hearing, and then email clearinghouse@eac.gov, clearinghouse@eac.gov, in order to submit questions for the record for the next 7 days. With that, I'll turn it over to Commissioner McCormick for questions for the panel.
Thank you, Chairman Masterson. I want to also thank all of you for being here. This is this new development in elections is uncharted territory, and so I think we're all kind of trying to figure out what this all means. And I appreciate all your comments and the cooperation that we've seen so far from election officials and from our federal partners as well. And I also want to add my thoughts and prayers just for Secretary Wyman. We pray that you get better very soon. Mr. Goff has somewhat addressed this, but could each of you tell me whether you worked with the DHS and the FBI in this past election cycle? And if so, can you describe the experience that you had with these federal agencies? What did they provide for you, and what did that experience look like? We could start with Secretary Merrill and move down.
Sure. In my own state, we always work with the FBI every election. We have a committee that's established before each, for lack of a better word, before each election, where we work with the FBI with any kind of threat that they either hear about or we hear about. So that was no different. And we did, I guess the DHS did come, we did use their cyber cleansing materials or programs. But it turns out we were already doing much of that using different products, but I guess the same thing. And that was really the only interaction we had. And I think that's pretty typical of the states.
We utilize their cyber hygiene product. However, we have very few internet-facing systems on our network. So it did not yield much success. However, we've always taken it a part of logging IPs for vote-by-mail ballot requests to make sure that there aren't multiple requests coming from a single location for multiple people where it's not a library or such. We found the relationship to be very professional, very effective. However, we did not begin the cyber hygiene until after the election as preparations for 2018 and our municipal elections coming forward.
In Weber County, we did not work with DHS. We're a smaller or mid-sized county, just over 100,000 voters, and we have a fantastic IT team, and our IT security individual is phenomenal. And so we worked closely with him. As far as the state of Utah is concerned, back in 2012, we had a data breach through the health department, and that brought in the FBI and DHS. And Utah is one of those states that has a centralized IT system and department, and they worked very closely with the departments so that when this designation came out and all of these, the cyber hygiene and other offerings were made available, the state of Utah was already doing those things either with DHS or itself through use of consultants and within their own IT department.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. Just to let you know, we've had interacting with the FBI for the last 20 years. We've been working with the U.S. Attorney's Office, the U.S. Department of Justice, and this was the first time that we've had dealings with the Department of Homeland Security. They were kind of interesting looking at all of our background and what we do. They've said that your system looks pretty good. So we've had them come in and actually review. So I feel very confident. We are self-contained. The City of Chicago Board of Election has their own IT department. Everything is self-contained in our office. So I feel very comfortable with my staff on what we do. We're the watchdogs.
Thank you, Commissioner. We did work and have worked closely for a number of years with the state's Chief Information Security Officer and the state IT division, even though our agency, our Secretary of State's office, possesses IT resources independently. We did have a good relationship working with the federal and the state DHS resources this cycle. We did bring in the FBI on a claimed hack that was claimed on Twitter from a prominent security researcher. And I think after a visit from an FBI agent inquiring as to the depth of this claimed hack, we believe that it was spurious. But absolutely, we had a good working relationship with them.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, do we have time for can I have one more question?
Yep.
Okay. We've been talking a lot about cybersecurity, but the DHS critical infrastructure designation is much wider than that, as you know. It also includes polling places and warehouses and places where equipment is kept, including the computer systems or voting systems and the spaces. What do you feel are the greatest areas of risk for security in elections? And can you describe generally, without putting yourselves at risk, some of the protocols that you put in place to secure both warehouses and polling places and things of that nature, in addition to the computer systems or any systems that are internet facing? we'll go the other way. We'll start with you, Mr. Timmons, and go the other way.
Absolutely, thank you. In our office, in the state of Colorado, we've moved very strongly, not just in the area of elections, but in business registrations towards online access to information. As Secretary Merrill indicated, access to a voter registration list generally is public across the country, and anytime computers are involved and network access to resources are involved, that's a risk point, and that it deserves vigilance and care exercised. And honestly, I believe that DHS can be of some assistance. The cyber hygiene services, penetration test resources, I think could be helpful. On the part of our office, and I think on behalf of the Secretaries of State across the country, we'd like to know exactly what they believe those top 3 risks are in their assessment of the elections infrastructure, because we believe that we can help inform them as to those areas where we can effectively take action and prepare ourselves.
Thank you. Mr. Groff?
Yes, the city of Chicago, where our voting equipment is stored, is a city-owned building. It's also where the police department stores some major hardware there, so we're secured 24 hours a day with police guards. When we do our logic and accuracy tests, we have police presence there 24 hours a day. So I feel very concerned where the voting equipment is stored and our locations. We have camera security 24 hours a day. Our building's on a lockdown, so I feel very comfortable with that.
I think the physical security is quite strong in our county, and I think election officials countrywide are the same. We're just very, we're like mama bears. We're fiercely protective of the process and of the controls. The room where we tabulate all of our results is completely separated. It has no connection to any local network or the internet. We have numerous pre-numbered security seals that protect our machines. We're a vote by mail county as well, and we have the 2-person requirement anytime a ballot is touched or a machine is touched. You always have 2 people available. So those controls are good. I think the largest risk, to be honest, is the risk of public perception and confidence. Lyndon B. Johnson said that confidence in the elective process is the foundation of confidence in the government. And I think that's so crucial, especially as candidates or others condemn and talk about the hacking or the high risk in elections. We need to not only make sure that our elections are secure, but we need to make sure that the public understands that they're secure and that the public has confidence when we say, yes, we have been very careful in doing this. And that's the hardest risk in my mind, because we're doing a good job, I think, of maintaining the security of the elections. Now we have to address the public confidence.
It's a great point. Thank you. It drives me crazy to turn on the TV and hear people say the election was hacked, when in fact
Exactly.
it wasn't. My belief is the media was hacked probably, and the campaigns probably were hacked, but the elections were not themselves.
That's right.
So thank you.
You
Mr.
know,
Chambliss.
originally when I was pondering your question, I was thinking of physical security, because that's really, especially for some of our smaller jurisdictions, is something that, because of limited resources, that they have to deal with. But I would have to agree with Mr. Hatch in his position of misinformation is the greatest risk. It takes often double the amount of time that it takes to explain that misinformation and to combat that. And so one of the things that I've often said is that while the news will run with any misinformation or with, a misstatement for that, it requires that great deal of time for us to explain that process, when the truth of the matter is, as was stated earlier, the amount of 2-person control, the amount of security that's placed in the elections profession is greater than many professions that I've been a part of that. And so I think that that really that's where we need to spend most of our time, is to debunk all of the rumors and the myths out there of the simplest things of whether the vote by mail ballot was counted, to the hacking of systems that are disconnected from the outside world. And so that's our greatest problem today.
Thank you. Secretary Merrill.
Yes, I guess I'd third that. I agree that the biggest result from all this and the most difficult to combat was the public perception that this area that's heavily regulated, statutorily controlled, I mean, in our state and in many states, the physical security of ballots and machinery and warehouses is all controlled by statute very strictly. So yes, our biggest job, and to put a more positive spin on it, I think today the public has a greater understanding than they did a year ago of exactly how secure elections are. So we've made some progress, at least I think, in explaining it, and that's the good part. I have to say, though, to be completely forthright, the breadth of the critical infrastructure designation to include things like polling places and physical structures was the thing that gave us the most pause, because those things in almost every state are not at all internet facing or cyber. And as I said, strictly controlled by state statute in most states. So that led us to just wonder what they mean by including a polling place, for example. Does this mean that somehow this critical infrastructure designation and whatever protocols follow it would follow into being able to decide where polling places were conceivably, or the parameters of those polling places? And that really gets into a territory that I think is far afield from cybersecurity.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner McCormick. In the interest of time and to live up to my promise to my fellow commissioners not to filibuster as I traditionally do, I'll ask one question to the county folks and then let you all go and bring up the next panel. And the question for the county folks is, how readily available are IT resources to you, either from the state, your own county, other places, and what resources do you wish you had or do you seek out, particularly after this election as you do a postmortem? So that's the one question for the county folks.
Our IT specialist and department is right down the hall from us, and we meet constantly, especially as we're preparing for the election. We're constantly talking about them about the support that they're providing just on an ongoing operational side, but also with the security, and they're very diligent in keeping us aware, making us aware of issues or potential concerns. At the state level, we have a fantastic relationship with our Lieutenant Governor's office, who's the Director of Elections for the state of Utah. And anytime we're meeting with their office, they have their own IT individual, kind of like a specialist to their office, who is there with us. And that has been just really helpful for us and for him as well, to be able to see the issues that are important to us from an operational standpoint and to bring that technological perspective as well. So in your last question, what do we need? We need funds. It takes, the old car commercial, you can pay me now or you can pay me later. And if we don't keep constant attention and funding towards the protection of elections infrastructure, which could mean equipment, it could mean consulting type services. If we don't do it, eventually there will be a breach, and then it will really cost.
I would agree as well. Our office has its own IT department. The Secretary of State's IT department works hand in hand with each one of the 67 counties for that. Again, funding to stay current on all of the applications and security softwares, not only from a hardware standpoint, but also from a consulting standpoint, is something that all states are looking for. And so funding is the key.
Yes, I'm very fortunate in Illinois that the State Board of Election oversees the statewide voter registration systems. We meet with the State Board on a regularly basis. The Chicago Board of Election also has a relationship with the city's IT department, the county's IT department. In fact, in the city of Chicago, the county clerk of Cook County, David Orris, his office is right downstairs from us, and we work very well together. So I think we are covering the bases what we need, but we're looking at purchasing new voting equipment, both city and county, and this is going to be a large ticket item. and funding, outside funding would be helpful.
Thank you all, and thank you to all of our panelists for being here. I think to summarize to two main themes. One is you all are control freaks. I try to put it a little nicer, and that is you all try to manage uncertainty, right? You spend every day asking yourself what can go wrong, responding to that question, and then solving the next problem that comes at you to manage that uncertainty. Put another way, when you talk about resources, if you think a good election's expensive, you should see a bad one, right? That's really expensive. And so as we look at this designation, as we bring the next panel up, I think the questions that you all naturally have comes from your healthy skepticism of managing risk and change. And so I hope we get to some of those questions. I can tell you this commission will continue to push to understand, ask questions, and develop the kind of resources you all need as election officials, whether that be IT training classes, as you mentioned, Mr. Chambliss, or simply providing forums like this. So thank you all for your time. We'll take a 5-minute break to bring up the next panel and then start promptly at 11:10. So first is Mr. Neil Jenkins. He's the Director of Enterprise Performance Management Office in the National Protection and Programs Directorate, Office of Cybersecurity and Communications. Dr. Jenkins previously, or in this role, he ensures that the CS&C, is that right? Assistant Secretary's strategic goals and priorities are reflected across all programs. Next to Mr. Jenkins, or Dr. Jenkins, is Mr. Robert Hansen. Mr. Hansen is the Director of the Prioritization of Modeling Division in the Department of Homeland Security, Office of Cyber and Infrastructure Analysis, or OCIA. Is that correct? All right, thank you both for being here. I'll flip this when you have about 5 minutes left just to give you a heads up, and otherwise the floor is yours, and then we'll follow up with questions. And I want to thank you both for being here, engaging this conversation, and being willing to talk with us here today.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. We appreciate it, and we appreciate the opportunity to answer questions. Is it on? Just get it closer. How's that? Good? All right. Thanks for the opportunity. We appreciate it. So, we are from the Department of Homeland Security, specifically our National Protection and Programs Directorate. Within NPPD, our role is to help our stakeholders, which includes state, local, tribal, and territorial governments, and private sector critical infrastructure owners and operators, manage both their cyber and their physical risk through information sharing, sharing of best practices, providing risk assessment services, and incident response services. This was the focus of our cybersecurity efforts with election officials in the lead up to the 2016 elections. We were finding disturbing indicators of cyber activity, and we wanted to get that information out to election officials and offer voluntary services as quickly and efficiently as possible to help with ensuring the cybersecurity of the 2016 elections. We coordinated these efforts with our federal partners to include the Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Investigation, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and the Federal Voters Assistance Program. And we received invaluable support from the Election Assistance Commission. We couldn't have done half of what we did without the help of the EAC and the expertise that you provided and the connections that you provided to the election officials across the U.S. We also greatly appreciated the insights and the assistance we received from NAS. NAS and EAC both helped guide our work and helped scope us and allowed us to focus on our efforts on what we could do in the short time that we had when we started this work in the summer. In the lead up to the election day, we offered some no-cost voluntary technical assistance to election officials. As discussed, we offered our cyber hygiene services, which includes scanning of externally facing IP addresses of systems, and this was done at the request of election officials. And through that, we provided regular automated reports detailing known vulnerabilities that we could see and possible mitigations for those vulnerabilities. As has been noted, by Election Day, we had signed up 33 states and 36 36 local jurisdictions up for this service, and we've added some locals since, and we can add more. We also learned a lot from these scans. The distribution of the vulnerabilities that we saw was not atypical from what we see in other sectors, to include federal departments and agencies, other state and local officials, or even in the critical infrastructure. And by that I mean we didn't see a disproportionate amount of critical vulnerabilities. We saw a typical distribution. We also saw that thousands of vulnerabilities were mitigated during this work. Election officials were taking the information we were providing to them, and they were using that information to mitigate those vulnerabilities. We also offered our risk and vulnerability assessment service, which is a more detailed service that offers internal and external scanning of systems. We note that this free service is still available, but the wait for this is long. The free service is popular, and there's a high demand for it with our federal departments and agencies, our critical infrastructure, private sector owners, and state and local officials across the nation. In the lead up to the election, we also shared best practices and threat information through our National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center, the NCIC, and the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, the MSISAC. We provided joint analysis reports that provided indicators that we received from our intelligence community and from law enforcement officials, and provided that to election officials through the EAC to allow them to defend their own networks from these threats. We also provided best practices documents on how to secure voter registration databases and how to make sure that your systems were protected from destructive malware attacks. These services and information sharing opportunities are still available today, and we encourage election officials to use them whenever possible. Our cyber hygiene, in particular, is scalable and offers a great opportunity for election officials to understand and manage their cyber risk using a free service. I also want to point out that it's clear to us that election officials have done an excellent job with security. As we have noted previously, the diversity in the election infrastructure provides a high level of security, and election officials have excellent practices in place to ensure the physical security of their equipment. From a practical matter, of the 20 states that we know were scanned and were targeted last summer, there were intrusions at only 2 of them. Of the other 18, when we engaged with the states, we saw that adversaries attempted to get into the systems but were stopped by defenses that election officials had established. This is a great sign and a fantastic start, but we must remain vigilant and continue to improve, especially in the face of the determined nation-state adversaries such as Russia. And then, of course, the reason we're here today, the critical infrastructure designation. In January, DHS made the decision to establish an election infrastructure subsector within the government facilities sector for election infrastructure. Our analysis had already established that systems and assets that make up election infrastructure meet the statutory definition of critical infrastructure, since the incapacitation or destruction of these systems would have a debilitating impact on security, national economic security, national public health or safety, or any combination of these two, mainly through a mainly by impinging on our ability to have a peaceful transition of power. Secretary Johnson then made the decision to establish a subsector and publicly state that the election infrastructure was critical infrastructure. That allowed us to do the following. We can now work with you in a formal, institutionalized, but voluntary way to reduce vulnerabilities over time and inform your security efforts, both from a physical and a cyber perspective. Our approach to critical infrastructure is and always has been an all hazards approach, both cyber and physical. We can work with you to establish coordinating councils to share information quickly and routinely. We can also provide you with security clearances so we can share classified threat information that can inform your security priorities. We can prioritize our efforts internally to provide technical assistance to you, and the designation allows us to publicly state that attacks on election infrastructure will result in actions from the U.S. government to respond and retaliate. Critical infrastructure designation does not give the federal government any new regulatory authorities or control over your activities. It simply provides services and avenues for us to work together effectively to increase the security and resilience of your systems. I wanted to spend a little bit of time on the coordinating councils, as we see this as the priority item going forward and the best way to show the value and benefit of the establishment of the subsector. Coordinating councils are the way that the federal government works voluntarily with non-federal partners to include state and local, tribal and territorial, regional, and private sector partners to ensure the security and resilience of our nation's critical infrastructure as outlined in the National Infrastructure Protection Plan. Coordinating councils are the CEO or CSO, the Chief Security Officer level engagement forum, where entities discuss strategy and policy issues related to security and resilience and discuss risk management at the sector level. Typically, a sector will have a government coordinating council, or a GCC, and a sector coordinating council, or an SCC. These coordinating councils then work together to share information. The government coordinating council is typically made up of federal and state and local partners. DHS, as the sector-specific agency, will lead this group, but we will seek support from EAC as the U.S. government experts in this space. But the GCC is more complicated in this case, mainly because of the necessary distance and separation between the federal government and the state and local government on these issues. We want election officials to be able to leverage the critical infrastructure protections that the subsector designation allows, and we want them to do so amongst themselves without the federal government involved if they so choose. So we would likely need a federal government coordinating council as well as a state and local government coordinating council for election officials. In addition, the sector coordinating council would be composed of the vendors, the suppliers, and other private sector entities that may need to participate in this work. The National Infrastructure Protection Plan model keeps the GCC and the SCC members separated to allow each council to meet with its respective membership, and so election officials, for example, can meet separately without their vendors, and vice versa for the vendors to meet without their election officials present if needed to discuss issues. Each of these coordinating councils will need to set up a charter, which is up to the subsector members, and our role at DHS will be to provide some examples and best practices on this topic and help them going forward. These councils can then meet together under the Critical Infrastructure Protection Advisory Council, or CPAC designation, to discuss collective issues of interest with some protections for the security-related information discussed. We understand that we need to keep this information and this process transparent. It's very important to maintain that transparency, but we also want to emphasize that security information in these conversations does need to be kept out of the public to allow vendors and election officials to mitigate vulnerabilities before they're made public. Within MPPD, our Office of Infrastructure Protection is in the process of developing a preliminary plan for engaging with the election infrastructure community on this partnership and its benefits. This will also provide insight from other sectors and best practices in the establishment of a sector. It is then up to the interested participants to voluntarily stand up their respective councils, establish charters, and decide on governance structures and meeting frequency. You may want to consider leveraging an existing organization, such as NAS, to build around the councils. This will ultimately be your decision. You may also elect to stand up an information sharing and analysis organization or an information sharing and analysis center as the operational sharing body that works with the sector. These don't have to be a formal relationship between the coordinating councils and the ISACs, but that may be something that can be done. Before I close, I did want to address the issue of the reports of DHS scanning on state election systems. We are aware of these requests in each case where a state has reached out to us regarding these attempted scans. We have worked with the state to make sure that they understand and that we come to an agreement that these are this was authorized normal activity coming from DHS users. One of the things that we have worked hard with in our public-private partnership is to gain that level of trust. And the questions that we have received have shown us that we need to learn how to engage with state and local election officials, and we have done that. And in all cases but one, we have come to an agreement with the state that what we are doing and what we're showing there is actual normal traffic coming from our users, either from professional or personal use of their work to access the state and local election officials' website as normally intended. In closing, we know that you have questions. We know that state and local election officials have concerns, and we look forward to answering those questions and working with you, especially through NASA's Cyber Task Force, to assure you that this is a voluntary process that will not result in any new regulations or federal oversight of your processes. As we've learned in cybersecurity, regulations don't always work in a security regime. Protecting election infrastructure from incidents requires a voluntary, non-regulatory collaboration with election officials and vendors that works to ensure security and resilience while protecting privacy and civil liberties, and allows owners and operators to make their own risk management decisions based on their own knowledge of how their systems operate and their business and mission needs. Regulations can be counterproductive in this type of regime. The security and resilience of our election system is critical to the long-term health of our democracy, and the federal government wants to help election officials just as we want to provide assistance to our partners in other critical infrastructure sectors. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob Hansen from our Office of Cyber Infrastructure Analysis.
Hi. So Neil and I forgot our Darth Vader helmets, which might have been apropos for this. But so I'm going to lay out two things to discuss before we turn it over to you all for questions. First of all, the analysis that we developed in advance of the 2016 election to help inform the department's decision-making around election issues. And then secondly, our analytic path forward that's going to help inform our activities in this space as we move forward. So first of all, in terms of the analysis that we developed in advance of the 2016 election, to put some context around it, it's something that we put together very quickly. We scoped just around cybersecurity issues. When we spoke with people from the states, from the National Association of Secretaries of States, with yourself and other federal agencies involved with the elections, many people raised there are physical security concerns too. You've got a lot of people gathered at polling places, and there are bad things that can happen when you've got large crowds together. We scoped that out of the analysis because we did want to understand the cybersecurity issue better, but going forward, that's something that we're going to want to have a longer discussion on. Secondly, in terms of how we developed the analysis, we did work very closely with, again, National Association of Secretaries of State, with several Secretaries of State's offices, staff, with, again, you all, with the national, with NIST. I'm not going to try to spell out what that is. And other partners, again, because we're not the subject matter experts in elections, and we wanted to understand from you all what you thought the relevant issues were here. So a quick discussion in terms of our analysis around consequences. There's been a very tight focus with some people on the potential for the manipulation of votes, which is absolutely a consequence that we were concerned about. At the same time, there are other consequences that we were concerned about. Secretary of State Merrill mentioned that many people were seeking to essentially steal identities or steal personal identifiable information from voter lists, which, as she noted, is kind of funny because if people just asked, in most cases, it would be provided by the Secretary of State's office. At the same time, stealing information like that does present in itself a vulnerability. There was a case a few years ago where a security researcher looked at a system in Maryland and found that you were able to essentially change somebody's voter registration information if you were able to get some of their personal information. We're also concerned about loss of public confidence, as was also mentioned by the previous group. If people even have a hint that they think an election might have been stolen or it wasn't conducted as they wanted to, the impacts to the government could be devastating. People questioning the legitimacy of their elected officials. So in terms of the analysis we put together, we focused on 3 different phases of the elections, and we aligned that with the NIST standards for how they're following, how they frame the process for elections. And we looked at pre-election activities. We looked at activities on election day, even though, again, that's kind of a misnomer because with early voting and other activities like that, not everything happens on election day. And then post-election activities when tabulation of votes, et cetera, is happening. Again, as Secretary of State Merrill mentioned, a lot of the action in terms of pre-election activity that we were concerned about from a cybersecurity perspective was around voter registration databases. And it's not necessarily just internet-connected voter registration databases, because often we find when we work in anything that's in any kind of computer, it may be connected to the internet in a way that people they did not realize. So as I said, we were worried about people stealing information from those voter databases, but also people manipulating the information in the voter databases to either enable people to vote who shouldn't be, or to deny people who should be able to vote the ability to vote. In terms of election day activities, what we were concerned about from a risk perspective was, when we first started our analysis, we had a lot of people who were worried about manipulating votes on a voting machine. As we looked at that issue, the resources it would take to manipulate votes at thousands of voting machines, even within a state, just the resources that it would take to do that were not. If that were the problem, we were way past our level of engagement really being helpful there. What we were more worried about was, again, looking back at the voter registration databases, some kind of manipulation of the rolls happening that would prevent valid voters from being able to vote, or would enable people who should not be able to vote from voting. In terms of post-election activities, what we were concerned about was, and one gentleman on the previous panel did mention, some kind of malicious activity happening around vote tabulation, and there are 2 ways that could happen. The first would be in the actual systems that are used to tabulate votes, somebody manipulating votes there. Again, likelihood of that happening, very low. The resources that it would take to do that, very high. And I mean, this is one place where, in general, finding that we had about the risk picture from a cybersecurity perspective in terms of the elections is because of the diversity of different processes and systems that are used by the states and the counties. You essentially had resilience in that diversity, where you can't crack one system and you've cracked all 50 or 51 or however many you want to put, however many numbers you want to put on this. You'd have to crack 51 systems, let alone systems at the county level. Our most likely but kind of worst case scenario concern in terms of election night was a manipulation of the publicly reported results, where you might have an election day, one person being declared the winner of some election, and then as the very robust canvassing processes started to kick in, that the 2016 election wasn't the first election where people were concerned about somebody trying to steal an election. Those robust canvassing processes might determine that the vote totals that were reported on election night weren't correct, and then getting back to the public confidence concern, you have you essentially have a public that was told somebody won on election night, and that's what people are really paying attention to. And then they find out through the canvassing processes that a different candidate won, and you've essentially got both sides potentially crying foul in the process. That was our 2016 focused analysis. We had a few emerging issues that we were concerned about that weren't going to be problems in 2016, but we think are going to impact the risk picture for elections in the future. As Mr. Timmons noted, e-poll books are a potential source of vulnerability going forward. There are a lot of ways that can be used, again, to either deny legitimate voters the right to vote or to enable illegitimate voters to vote. And just in general, the adoption of technology is in itself a risk, which it isn't really a popular perspective. There are some people we work with in the critical infrastructure space that would prefer everybody still be using abacus is, I don't know what the plural is there, and manual overrides for all processes and not connecting anything to a computer, which is not really a path forward that anybody can see in any space. Secondly, as many voting machines were purchased in the aftermath of the Help America Vote Act, we're starting to reach the end of the life cycle for a lot of voting machines. And some companies are projecting that by the 2020 election, something like 70% of voting machines are going to be replaced. So with any big technology buy like that, there's the potential for bad things to happen. Either you adopt new technology and you didn't realize that there was a vulnerability in the technology you adopted. We saw in Virginia a few years ago, voting machines that had been purchased by either the state or a county, I'm not sure which, turned out to have a security vulnerability that nobody realized until a security researcher essentially found it on their own. So path forward on the analysis that we're doing is we are trying to do 3 different products that are going to inform the department's efforts in this space. The first is going to be a characterization of election systems just to inform, basically from a Homeland Security perspective, what we care about. One finding that we generally have when we're talking about any infrastructure sector is generally we at the department are not the subject matter experts. We aren't the subject matter experts on nuclear facilities. We aren't the subject matter experts on the chemical sector necessarily. And so we need to have those foundational products that really lay out, what are election systems? Why do we care about them? Secondly, as Mr. Timmons noted, right now there are a lot of potential risks, and each one of them can scare individuals on their own. One thing that we do at the department is we try to develop risk assessments of Homeland Security risk in certain sectors. And we have structured processes and methodologies to help assess Homeland Security risk. And we'd like to apply those methods to assess risk in this space. The third product we'd like to do is focused on emerging risks in this space. For risk assessment, you prefer quantitative information, but something like e-poll books, since they haven't been necessarily widely adopted yet, we need to have a little bit more of a qualitative discussion around it. And what's going to be important about those products that I mentioned is that they're done in partnership with this community. We've already engaged with the National Association of Secretaries of State staff, and we've engaged with you all a little bit, but I'd like to engage with you all more formally on engaging with the community here, because again, we're not the subject matter experts on this. And also, as we develop the analysis, getting it reviewed. It's going to be important that whatever analysis that we put together that's going to inform our efforts in this space is technically valid and credible and is put together in partnership with you all. So I understand that there are technical review committees or something along those lines that are set up by the EAC, and we would like to engage with you to try to figure out if that or another method would be a good way to engage with the community going forward.
Thank you both. Appreciate your time and your comments. I'll start with Commissioner McCormick with questions, and then we'll just kind of volley questions at you until either time expires or you tap out. So,
Thank you both for being here. I appreciate your willingness to come and discuss this infrastructure designation. I know that you've felt the resistance of the community. It's been mentioned more than once, and including myself. But I just want to assure you that we want to cooperate. in any way possible, and we are, of course, naturally skeptical, and it is not against either of you personally, but or anyone else working on this, but it is a concern of ours. So with that, I have a lot of questions, but I won't get into all of them. I will probably submit some of them for the record and to be answered later. But Mr. Hansen, I appreciate you stating that you are not subject matter experts. Have either of you actually been involved in running an election at all, at any level?
No.
Mr. Hansen?
Not in managing an election. And
Other than
running for
voting,
one.
have you worked in an election?
Not in managing, in working for a candidate.
Working for a candidate,
Yeah.
okay.
But I do think that is not atypical for how we deal with all of our sectors. Sometimes we are lucky and we have people who work at DHS who come from the financial services sector and then work with Treasury with the financial services sector. But in most cases, our employees do not have in-depth knowledge of those systems unless they are working with those sectors on an everyday basis.
So respectfully, without having any subject matter expertise, you need the people in this room, for example, to
Absolutely.
actually work on this.
And that's why we did a lot of outreach early in the process with the EAC, with NAS, to help build what we needed to do, to shape what we needed to do. Those interactions that we had with EAC and with NAS late in the summer really affected what we were going to do, what we tried to do, what we needed to do, and shaped the outcomes of what we did based on the expertise that we got.
So you've actually shaped something here? Because I don't know what the shape of this looks like yet.
So by shaping, I mean from our perspectives, based on our limited expertise, when we went into this issue in July, we saw this as a problem with internet voting. Those conversations were quickly dispelled by conversations with the experts on this. And we realized that the problems were not necessarily on that the problems were more towards voter registration databases, which is what we actually were seeing being targeted in the work that we were doing. So while we may not be experts in how an election is run, we are certainly more experts in how cybersecurity matters are handled. We were able to work with our partners in the federal government and the intelligence community and law enforcement to understand what the risk picture was starting to look like from the threat side, where the threat was targeting, what they were going after. And then we were able to shape that with the work engaging with EAC and engaging with NAS on what is within the realm of the possible. What can election officials do? What do they need to do? And we worked. That's why we got to the point where we were offering our cyber hygiene technology for internet-facing IP addresses and that kind of work. And I will say, too, that this sector is certainly not the first sector that we've dealt with that has been skeptical of critical infrastructure designation. I think that's typical of the work that we've done in the past when we've stood up new sectors. We've seen worry, we've seen a lot of concern about what does this mean for their everyday operations. But through work with the sector, through work with the actual experts, we show that what we're providing is security and resilience information and a way to get information from the federal government that can shape what you need to do to help make your systems more secure and resilient. And that's really the focus of this, is providing you with the information, additional technical assistance that you need.
So many questions, but are you suggesting the efforts to date in the election space have been inadequate or delinquent?
Absolutely not.
Security?
Absolutely not. And I think that was something that we've been very upfront about. The security and the diversity of the system, or the diversity of the system providing security. And I think that it's very clear to us that the physical security is extremely good on the cybersecurity, on the election official side. It's extremely clear to us in working with election officials how much of a control freaks they are and how good they are at planning. Coming from a planning background myself, working with military planners, working with other planners in the federal government, the planning expertise embedded in election officials is just as high, if not higher, than in those other communities. So I have utmost confidence in their ability to plan. What we want to do is make sure that the information that we get from the federal government side, from an intelligence perspective, from a law enforcement perspective, is also provided to election officials quickly and in a way that they can digest it and use it to help round out that security picture.
So you mentioned that folks might need to get security clearances in order to work with you on these issues. Would that include just state election officials, local election officials? IT officials, county IT officials? I mean, what kind of scope are we looking at on security clearances here?
So we're looking at that, and that's something that we need to figure out from our perspective and from the election officials' perspective of what is needed. The reason security clearances in this space are important is so that stakeholders can prioritize their efforts. Admittedly, we in the federal government give a lot of security information to our stakeholders. We give hundreds of reports, indicators on a day-to-day basis. And what we often need to do is sometimes sit down with a CEO or a state Homeland Security advisor in a classified way and tell them this particular product that we're talking to you about is directly related to a specific threat that we know about right now. And then they can take that product that's unclassified and then work with their people that do not have security clearances and tell them and highlight and prioritize for them, this is work that you need to do. This is work that we need to implement. Often the IT folks that are working for those CEOs don't have security clearances, and they don't need them. They just need the product, and they need their boss to tell them, go and implement this. And that's how we typically work this. So I think in some states, we'll find that providing the Secretary of State with a security clearance may be enough. In other states where the Secretary of State does not have direct control over other things that are happening in the elections in their states, we may have to take a different approach. But that's something that we're going to be looking at.
Yeah, it is varied. I mean, with 8,000 jurisdictions, the scope of this is just immense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
And one thing I do want to note is classified information is one type of security information that we share, but we also have sensitive but unclassified information that we call for official use only. That's also valuable, and again, by being acknowledged as part of the Homeland Security here, it essentially establishes that need to know. Many of the products that are actually developed by the Office of Cyber and Infrastructure Analysis, where I work, that are relevant in your space today, looking at issues like active shooter or emerging cybersecurity risks, are available through the Homeland Security Information Sharing Network, where you have to have a need to know and you have to apply for an account there, but it's not the same as security clearance. It's not the same burdensome process. I mean, even at the department, the security clearance process can be hard. So this designation will give election officials access to that information just right off the bat.
okay. You mentioned that you're concerned about the manipulation of voter registration lists. Are you suggesting there could be fraud on the voter registration lists?
I'm not the first person, I think. that
I
would
think
be.
you're not, right? Although there's been a lot of resistance to
But
that.
just one thing to note is I'm not asserting that any of this has happened. It is a risk.
I think from our past experience, if someone has access to a database and can take that database, they could also leave that database there and make changes on it. They could leave that database there and they could delete some entries on it. And those are the kinds of things that we're really worried about in terms of voter registration databases, is an adversary's ability to affect the integrity or availability of those databases when election officials actually need them.
So audits of voter registration lists would be probably recommended.
Absolutely.
Okay. You mentioned that your greatest concern is manipulation of publicly reported votes on election night. Of course, this has been an issue since Dewey defeats Truman in 1948, way before the adoption of technology. Why do you think this is a greater risk now than in 1948?
And for exactly the reason of the adoption of more and more technology into the system. As you adopt more technology, it just introduces more vectors for potential compromise. So it's not that, again,
Because you mentioned voter confidence. I think, I don't see the difference in the issue from 48 to 2017. You still had headlines that said Dewey defeats Truman. It's the same kind of election night reporting.
We're seeing the impacts today of people being more concerned about this issue now than they have been in the past. I mean, as people talk about some of the issues that have been swirling in this space, there just are the seeds of people doubting the legitimacy of election processes.
Which has been forever.
It's been
Without
forever,
the
and
technology.
we're not claiming to.
But I
have come
think
up with it.
but I think
Yeah.
the problem is that the technology enables actors that in the 40s would not be able to create a Dewey defeats Truman moment now be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, the news was not maliciously
I mean, I think you could take over a newspaper in 1948 and do the same thing.
Sure, you could. So that was a threat then. I think it's a threat now. And It's a
Okay.
threat that we are
But
concerned
suddenly
by.
this has been raised to such a level that that's the most concern that we have over manipulating the system. I'm just asking a
So
question
I would
about it.
restate, and I think what Bob meant when he said that earlier was that as we led up to Election Day, that became one of our big worries on Election Day.
Mm-hmm.
I think going forward now, that's still a concern, but I don't think I would label it as our primary concern.
Yeah, that's not our primary concern. It was our concern leading up to it. Was the most probable, but most impactful scenario that we
Ba-
saw leading up to the 2016 election. And one thing that is important is intent. In this
sorry.
discussion, when they reported Dewey defeats Truman, the newspaper wasn't trying to throw bombs.
Mhm.
With in terms of public confidence, when public's going to get worried about something, they're much more worried about the potential of individuals or other actors to potentially manipulate an election as opposed to a newspaper just running to print too quickly.
Well, I mean, we can get into this longer, but, I don't see a whole lot of differences of the concern, at least from the voter side. You mentioned that 20 states' voter registration systems were scanned. Are all those 20 states aware of the scan
Yes,
that
they
happened
are.
against them? Can we get a list of those states, please?
We do not provide that information out publicly.
Can the EAC get the list of those states?
We may be able to talk about that, but we would not publicly release them.
Okay. 33 states and 33 local jurisdictions took advantage of DHS's resources. Can we get a list of those jurisdictions?
Not publicly.
Can the EAC
DHS
get a list of those?
We may be able to discuss that after this.
Um,
And just by practice, by what we do, working with critical infrastructure stakeholders, a lot of the work that we do revolves around anonymity between us at DHS and the entity that we're working with. And we protect their identity, we protect their information, we protect their privacy and civil liberties. We treat the state and local election officials in the same way, which is why we haven't provided any lists publicly of what states participated and what states did not.
I think this just goes to my concern about transparency in all of this. I mean, I think that the public deserves to understand what's going on with their voting system. Does DHS conduct the cyber resources itself, or do you contract those activities out to non-government companies?
The offerings that we have provided to election officials are DHS services.
Okay.
We do not use contractors for those services. Or we
Okay.
do not use contracted capabilities for those services.
Mr. Hinson, you mentioned the WIN vote system in Virginia. Did DHS have a role in decertifying that system or discovering the issues with it?
No.
Okay, thank you. I have tons more questions, but I know my fellow commissioners would like to have some question time as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner McCormick. Commissioner Hicks.
Thank you both for being here. I wanted to expand a little bit upon what Commissioner McCormick was talking, what I was inferring a little bit earlier, in terms of having institutional knowledge on becoming a poll worker. I think that the designation of critical infrastructure for elections is different than banks or waterways in that there's an opportunity for DHS workers to serve as poll workers and actually see this from the inside. And so I would encourage folks to do that. I know that there's elections all the time. For instance, I know there's elections going on right now in Missouri. So I think that actually going into seeing this from the inside might give a better perspective of how elections are run. And I know that it helped me a great deal when I was a little bit on the younger side as well. So,
Still young, Tom.
yeah. In terms of ensuring transparency, I think that there are a lot of individuals who have a great fear of the government in general, whether or not that be on the left or the right or just down the middle as well. And when you talk about involving the vendors as well, I think that there's a lot of folks who feel that the vendors have claimed to have proprietary software and not let those things out. I wanted to hear a little bit more about how you want to maintain transparency while involving vendors or not letting people know who's being scanned and things like that as well. And then I have a couple of other questions as well. So.
I'm sorry about that. When we work with the private sector in other critical infrastructure sectors, we work with them to decide what they need from a risk management perspective, how they need to shape their sector from a risk management perspective, what they need from the federal government for that. And so as part of this process, when we engage with the private sector vendors for election infrastructure, we will work with them and seek to have conversations about what it is that you want, what kind of information do you want, how can we work best with you to get you that information. Our role will not be to go in and certify any systems or to do any kind of technical assistance with those companies unless they ask for that. We can provide those services going forward if they request it, but it's not something that will be mandated. But it is the heart of our private-public partnership that we work with private sector to be collaborative, to provide information, to have robust conversations around security and resilience that we can leverage to improve their security and resilience going forward.
And striking the right balance between transparency and proprietary information, that's why it's going to be so critical to have active engagement with you all as we work to stand up the governance framework that's going to be put around the subsector councils that'll be established. I mean, again, you all know better than us what's the right way to, what information should be discussed openly. I mean, when it comes to security information, when do we start clamping down on that discussion? And you all are going to know that better than us, which is why we need the active involvement of the community.
Right, I have a ton of questions, but I'll just leave it with two quick ones. Whatever you do in terms of moving forward with solutions for cybersecurity or physical security, I want to implore that you do not forget about the disabled community and ensuring that they have full access to voting and moving forward with that as well. Also, what may work in New Hampshire may not work in California, so that there's no one-size-fits-all in terms of when you look towards solutions. And lastly, something that struck me, you said that Russia was a nation state that led the attack. Are there any other nation states that instituted any sort of attacks on our election systems?
Not that we are aware of.
Okay. And with that, I'll stop.
Thank you, Commissioner Hicks. With about 5 minutes remaining, I have quite a few questions too, but try to prioritize, and short answers are better, and we'll see. The first and perhaps most pressing question is, can we expect, and if so when, a clear indication from this administration that the designation is here to stay? Is that something we should expect as a community?
So I think that statement was made by the Secretary when he was asked that in congressional testimony a couple of weeks ago. His indication was that we were going to stay with the designation.
Okay. Is there a scenario in which the designation could be rescinded or rolled back? Is that something that happens?
It could happen, but there's no indications that it will happen.
Okay. Tangibly, for election officials, details matter, right? As you heard, they're detail-oriented people. What tangibly are the next steps? What happens next? What can they expect? We've heard reports that Mr. Hansen's working on, 3 reports. We've heard coordinating councils. Do you need coordinating councils before reports? And what are the timeframes of these steps as you see them?
Right. So I can talk to some of the issues with the coordinating councils and the planning. I'll let Bob talk about the reports. But essentially, we would like to begin meeting with election officials. Mainly, I think our initial contact will be through the NAS Cybersecurity Task Force. We see that as a very robust body to work with, to address questions, to address concerns, and provide what we have on best practices and guidance for establishing coordinating councils. We also look to the EAC to help us determine how to best get to the local communities so that we can work with local election officials on these same issues and hear their concerns. But within the next couple of weeks, I hope that we can have meetings and at least preliminary conversations with NAS and the task force prior to the July meeting so that we can kind of get some stuff going with that, and then potentially have a more robust conversation surrounding the July NAS meeting.
In terms of the reports that we're working on, it's a parallel and linked effort with what's going on with the with the subsector designation, but it's not a dependency. We have an interest in terms of understanding the election. I say sector, not like capital S sector, but these systems, no matter what. And what we don't want to end up in is a similar situation to a year ago, where all of a sudden a bunch of people get very worried about this, and we don't have a great understanding of the space. So these products, we would like them to inform all of the discussions around the subsector going forward, but they're being done independently so that the department can work with your community to better understand the risk in this space.
Well, the good news or bad news for you is, I think, as you heard, people are already concerned. So you've got their attention. Is it the expectation, or can we get your commitment that these reports will be vetted through the community in order to weigh in and inform your work?
I mean, it's not just a commitment. I am asking you for help in this. I mean, it needs to happen. I can't write these in a vacuum.
I think we'll leverage both the NAS Cybersecurity Task Force for that, and would also like the support of the EAC Standards Board, I believe, to work through those issues as well.
Okay. Two questions from the previous panel that I thought are particularly important. First is, what resources become available to election officials because of this designation that weren't already available to election officials, for instance, this past election that you offered? So what benefit or resources comes that previously weren't available?
So the main benefit will be through the coordinating council structure itself at this point, because the technical assistance offerings that we provided during the lead up to the election are still available to election officials and will remain available. The benefit of the coordinating council is that more robust, regular engagement that we can have, and we'll have an office within DHS whose job it will be to be the sector-specific agency for election officials. So they will be able to share information robustly. They'll be thinking about election infrastructure all the time. They'll be engaging with election officials all the time to build this stuff out, to understand what the election officials need, and be able to provide security and resilience information through that channel. And we won't be doing this from an ad hoc way going forward.
Okay, so that answer suggests that the election officials, if they chose not to engage, don't have to. They don't have to come ask for those resources.
We would still work to provide those resources, like our unclassified information sharing products, our best practices documents, as broadly as possible. We would give those to the council, and we could have conversations with the coordinating council about those, but we would also share them with EAC. We would give them to the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center so that they would go out to all of the states. Our product distribution and our reports that go out will not be limited to just those who choose to participate in the sector. They'll go to everyone, and then everyone can use them as they see fit.
And is there any money associated with the designation? Is there any resources support? I mean, you heard up here the two main concerns are resources, as in money, and public confidence.
Right.
And so, what's the impact? Whoa. Uh-oh. This happens to me a lot, actually. That's how my wife tries to tell me too. What resources are available as far as money, or may become available as a result of this designation, if any?
So as of right now, no additional resources are available in terms of money or funds to election officials. Election officials are encouraged to leverage their the FEMA grant process to attempt to request funds through that process. We know that's hard. We know that's going to be very difficult for states to do, but we encourage election officials to try that in the interim. We are looking at possibilities, but I think in the absence of of resources that come from Congress or from some new congressional authorization, there won't be direct funding that comes from DHS outside of the normal state and local grant program.
All right. Final, I guess, question is, or response is, how do you respond to the election officials and the election community? And I think we heard each one of the panelists up here express it, to this concern that there needs to be respect for the line of what the federal role is here. That it is important to the citizens and confidence of the process that the federal government, and it doesn't matter which administration, doesn't come in and take over or have too great a reach into the process. And that's something I think universally we've certainly heard and I think is fair. How do you respond to that concern?
We would say, we are going to show you how we work this process. And that is without regulation, without any kind of enforcement, without any requirements that are not currently in place. The critical infrastructure designation doesn't provide any new authorities for us. So if at any point in the process, state and local election officials feel that we are doing something we shouldn't be doing, we should work through that from a authorities perspective and look at the legislation, look at the what we can do legally. But for the Department of Homeland Security, the way we work with critical infrastructure is not through regulation. It's through partnerships. It's through voluntary partnerships, sharing of information, listening to the community, determining what they want, and then working with them to provide that information.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, I just want to say, the EAC, of course, wants to cooperate in any way possible, and our budget is actually being cut. This is outside of our mission of HAVA, so, we'll do what we can, but it's going to be a struggle for us even on the funding issue. And I think a lot of the states are facing, and the localities are facing the same issues. So I just want to put that out there. Thank you.
I want to thank you both for being here, and I do have a few more questions, but I'll submit those for the record.
Yeah, with your permission, we'll collect over the next week additional questions, not just from us, but the community, and then share them with you and work to get responses, if that's all right. Just in closing, and I don't think this will surprise you all, but I think you said it, and I think the prior panel said it, and I think it's an important way to close. The process worked in 2016. The process served voters well, provided accessibility, an accurate process with integrity. And so moving forward as this designation is explored and questions are asked and answered, let's understand that election officials did a darn good job in this last election and rose to the challenge in an election cycle I think none of us have ever seen before. And so they are professionals that administered a professional process. And to the extent we can help them, I think that's what we want to do. But I think it's important to recognize what great work they did this election cycle in the face of real challenges, both perception-wise and otherwise. So with that, I do want to thank you all for your time, for the fact you'd come. This probably isn't the first engagement we'll have or the last engagement we'll have. And I want to thank the prior panelists and my fellow commissioners for the meeting here today. So with that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Go ahead.
Before the motion to adjourn, I would say, before the motion to adjourn, I would say that this stuff will be archived on the EAC.gov website, and that we should get as much information as we can so folks can go to that. And with that, I move that we adjourn.
And I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? The meeting is adjourned.